The humid, recycled air of the Xylos Prime Medica base hung thick with a scent of antiseptic and ozone, a sterile perfume that did little to mask the underlying tang of blood and fear. Corporal Finn O'Connell wiped a smear of grime from his brow with the back of his glove, his eyes scanning the triage bay with a weary professionalism that belied his 26 years. He'd seen enough shattered bodies in the last 6 months of the Kthar War to last a lifetime, but the medics on this rock didn't get the luxury of looking away. His current patient was a mystery, a blue-skinned humanoid woman with hair like spun moonlight, found half-buried in the wreckage of a downed scout ship on the planet's toxic northern rim. She was tall, her frame lean and powerful even in unconsciousness, and the deep gash across her ribs looked angry and alien against her cerulean skin. Finn worked with quiet efficiency, his hands steady as he cleaned the wound. The standard-issue bioscanner had been useless. Her physiology was a labyrinth of unknowns, its readings spitting out error codes that made the base's chief physician, a perpetually flustered man named Dr. Eris, throw his hands up in despair. "Just keep her stable, O'Connell," he'd barked before scurrying off to deal with a platoon of soldiers suffering from nerve gas exposure. So, Finn was left to rely on his own instincts, the basic field medic training that had saved more lives than he could count, and a strange, quiet sense of calm that seemed to emanate from the alien woman herself. Her skin was cool to the touch, not cold, and her breathing, though shallow, was rhythmic and strong. As he applied a coagulant gel, her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of a stormy sea, deep, intelligent, and filled with a pain that went far beyond the physical. She watched him for a long moment, her gaze sharp and assessing, as if trying to decide whether he was friend or foe. Finn offered a small, reassuring nod, the kind he'd give to a spooked animal. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice low and gentle. "You're safe here." He returned to his work, carefully stitching the torn flesh with a micro-suture kit. It was then, as his needle pulled the thread taut, that she spoke. Her voice was a whisper, rough with pain but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "Human. I'm no ordinary alien." The words hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. Finn paused, his needle hovering over her skin. He met her storm-gray eyes again, and in their depths, he saw something that made his breath catch. Not just pain, but a universe of secrets, a history written in starlight and sorrow. He didn't ask what she meant. He simply nodded again, a silent acknowledgement of the truth in her statement, and continued his work. Her name, she told him a moment later, was Lyrian, and the way she said it, with a soft trill at the end, made it sound like a song. He introduced himself as Finn, and for the first time, the ghost of a smile touched her lips. Over the next few hours, as Finn tended to her, a fragile rapport formed. Lyrian was stoic, refusing most of the painkillers he offered, claiming they clouded her mind. She watched his every move with an unnerving focus, her questions sharp and precise. She asked about the war, about the Kthar, about why humans were fighting on a world so far from their own sun. Finn answered honestly, telling her of the resource conflicts, of the desperate scramble for survival in a galaxy that seemed determined to tear itself apart. He learned that her ship wasn't military. It was a science vessel, caught in the crossfire of a battle it never wanted to join. Her crew was dead, their mission, a search for a rare mineral that could heal a plague ravaging her homeworld, lost with them. Her story was one of tragedy, but there was a fire in her that refused to be extinguished. She spoke of her people, the Ilari, with a fierce pride that made Finn think of old Earth tales of lost civilizations. They were scholars, artists, philosophers, a race who had long ago abandoned warfare for the pursuit of knowledge and harmony. To be stranded here, in the middle of a brutal, senseless war, was a cruel joke played by a heartless universe. Finn found himself captivated by her. There was a grace to her movements, even while injured, and a depth of intelligence in her eyes that was both intimidating and alluring. He began to see past the blue skin and white hair, past the alien nature of her, to the person beneath, the woman who carried the weight of her entire world on her shoulders. Their quiet vigil was shattered by the blaring of the base's proximity alarms. A harsh electronic shriek tore through the Medica bay, followed by the heavy thud of boots on metal grating. Dr. Eris burst into the room, his face pale. "Kthar raiding party," he gasped, his voice tight with panic. "They've breached the outer perimeter. We have to evacuate the critical patients." Chaos erupted. Orderlies scrambled, grabbing medical kits and dragging portable life support units towards the emergency shuttles docked at the rear of the base. Finn's mind raced. Lyrian was in no condition to be moved, let alone survive a frantic evacuation through a war zone. Her stitches would tear, and she would bleed out before they made it 100 meters. He looked at her, and she looked back at him, her expression grim but resolute. "Go," she said, her voice firm despite its weakness. "Save yourself." But Finn O'Connell wasn't built that way. He'd spent his whole life fixing things, putting broken pieces back together. He couldn't just leave her here to be captured, or worse, by the Kthar, whose reputation for cruelty was legendary. An idea, born of desperation and a mechanic's ingenuity, sparked in his mind. The base had an old, decommissioned maintenance tunnel that led to a hidden storage bunker a kilometer away, a relic from the planet's mining days. It was narrow, dark, and probably full of God knew what, but it was their only chance. "We're not leaving you," Finn declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. He quickly disconnected her from the main monitors, grabbed a portable medkit, and, with a strength born of adrenaline, carefully lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, but her weight was solid, real. She let out a small gasp of pain as he moved her, but her arms wrapped around his neck, her grip surprisingly strong. "You are either very brave or very foolish, human," she whispered against his shoulder. "Perhaps both," he grunted, already moving towards a concealed hatch in the floor near the back of the bay. The sounds of battle grew louder, blaster fire, screams, the guttural roars of the Kthar warriors. Finn's heart hammered against his ribs as he pried open the heavy hatch, revealing a dark, damp shaft that smelled of rust and earth. He climbed down first, then helped Lyrian descend, his hands supporting her injured side with infinite care. The tunnel was claustrophobic, barely wide enough for them to walk side by side. Finn used a wrist-mounted light to guide their way, the beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. Every distant explosion from the surface above sent tremors through the ground, showering them with dust and debris. Lyrian walked with a determined limp, her jaw clenched against the pain, refusing to be a burden as they navigated the winding passage. A new kind of tension bloomed between them. It was no longer just medic and patient, human and alien. They were two souls clinging to life in the belly of a dying world, bound together by circumstance and a shared will to survive. Finn found himself talking to keep her focused, telling her stupid jokes from his childhood on Mars, stories about his old dog, anything to distract her from the agony in her side and the terror of their situation. To his surprise, she laughed, a soft, melodic sound that seemed utterly out of place in the grim tunnel. "Your humor is strange, Finn O'Connell," she said, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. "But I find it comforting." He learned more about her in those dark hours. She spoke of her home, a world of crystalline forests and oceans that sang under twin moons. She spoke of her family, of a younger sister she hadn't seen in years. And she spoke, with a hint of something that might have been shame, of the secret her people guarded, the reason they were hunted across the galaxy. The mineral they sought wasn't just for healing. It was the key to an ancient technology, a power source that could either save 1,000 worlds or destroy them all. That was why the Kthar wanted it, and why her people had been forced into hiding. "I am no ordinary alien," she repeated, her voice heavy with the burden of her truth. "I am the last keeper of the heart of Eler." Finn didn't fully understand the implications, but he understood the weight of her responsibility. He saw the fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for her people, for the galaxy at large. In that moment, his mission changed. It wasn't just about getting her to safety anymore. It was about protecting her, and the impossible secret she carried. They finally reached the end of the tunnel, emerging into a small, dusty bunker filled with old mining equipment. A single, battered comms unit sat on a shelf, its power light flickering weakly. Hope surged in Finn's chest. If he could get a signal out, maybe he could call for a rescue shuttle from the main fleet. He rushed to the console, his fingers flying over the controls, trying to bypass the security protocols. Lyrian slumped against a wall, her strength finally failing her. Her breathing was labored, and a fresh trickle of blood seeped through the bandages on her side. "Finn," she called out, her voice weak. He turned to her, his heart clenching at the sight of her pallor. He hurried back to her side, checking her vitals with a practiced hand. Her pulse was thready, her skin clammy. The journey had been too much that he needed to get her help, and fast. Just as he was about to try and carry her back towards the tunnel entrance, hoping to find another way, the comms unit crackled to life. A voice, distorted by static but unmistakably human, came through the speaker. "This is Lieutenant Vance of the UNS Dauntless. We're sweeping the area for survivors. Does anyone read me? Relief washed over Finn like a tidal wave. He grabbed the mic. "Lieutenant, this is Corporal Finn O'Connell from Xylo's Medica base. I have a critical patient with me, an alien female. We're in a bunker, grid sector 7 Alpha." There was a pause. Then the lieutenant's voice returned, sounding grim. "O'Connell, we have hostiles converging on your position. We can't risk a shuttle landing. You'll have to make your way to the extraction point on foot. It's 2 clicks east of your location. Can you do that?" 2 kilometers. With a dying alien woman in his arms. Finn looked at Lyrian, who was watching him with those storm-gray eyes, full of trust and a quiet resignation. He knew he couldn't carry her that far. But he also knew he couldn't leave her. Before he could formulate a plan, the heavy blast door of the bunker groaned under a tremendous impact. Dust rained from the ceiling. The Kthar had found them. Their time was up. Finn's mind raced, searching for a solution, a weapon, anything. He was just a medic, not a soldier. He had a sidearm, but it was a pea shooter against the armored monstrosities outside. Lyrian placed a cool, blue hand on his arm. Her touch sent a jolt through him, not of electricity, but of something deeper, a connection that felt ancient and true. "There is another way," she whispered, her voice gaining a strange, resonant power. "But you must trust me, Finn O'Connell. Completely." She closed her eyes, and a soft blue light began to emanate from her body, pulsing gently from the wound in her side. The air in the bunker grew charged, humming with an energy Finn could feel in his bones. The light grew brighter, enveloping them both in its glow. Outside, the pounding on the door stopped, replaced by confused, guttural shouts. The Kthar could sense it too, the raw, untamed power of the heart of Eler, flowing through its last keeper. Lyrian opened her eyes, and they were no longer gray, but blazing with the same brilliant blue light. "Hold on to me," she commanded, her voice now echoing with a power that shook the very walls. And as the blast door finally gave way, revealing the hulking, armored forms of the Kthar warriors, Finn did the only thing he could do. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, and stepped into the light. The blue light didn't just envelop them, it consumed them. One moment, Finn was bracing for the brutal impact of Kthar claws, his body shielding Lyrian's fragile form. The next, the world dissolved into a silent, swirling vortex of cerulean energy. There was no sound, no sensation of movement, only the profound, humming connection between them, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against his own chest. When the light faded, they were no longer in the dusty bunker. They stood on a balcony of impossible architecture, overlooking a city that defied physics. Towers of living crystal spiraled towards a sky painted with 3 moons, their surfaces shimmering with internal light. The air was sweet and clean, carrying the faint melodic chime of distant bells. It was a place of breathtaking beauty and profound peace, the absolute antithesis of the war-torn hellscape they'd just fled. Finn stumbled back, his mind reeling, his medic's instincts screaming that this was impossible. He looked down at Lyrian, who was now standing on her own, her wound completely healed, her skin glowing with a soft, healthy luminescence. The power that had flowed through her had not just saved them, it had restored her. "This is Eler," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of sorrow and pride. "Or what remains of its memory." She explained that this was not the physical planet, which had been lost to the Kthar centuries ago, but a psychic echo, a sanctuary woven from the collective consciousness of her people and anchored by the heart she carried within her. It was a place outside of normal space and time, a final refuge. For a moment, Finn felt a wave of relief so profound it brought tears to his eyes. They were safe. That relief was short-lived. A figure emerged from the crystalline archway leading onto the balcony. He was tall and regal, his blue skin marked with intricate silver tattoos that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. His white hair was braided with threads of starlight, and his eyes, the same stormy gray as Lyrian's, held an ancient, weary wisdom. But there was also a coldness in his gaze as it fell upon Finn. "You have brought an outsider into the last sanctum of our people, Lyrian," the man said, his voice resonating with a deep, sonorous power that vibrated in Finn's bones. "This is a grave breach of our most sacred law." Lyrian stepped forward, placing herself between Finn and the newcomer. "He saved my life, father," she declared, her voice firm. "Without him, the heart would have fallen into Kthar hands. He is not a threat. He is an ally." Finn's mind reeled again. Her father? He was supposed to be long dead, a casualty of the first Cthar invasion. The man, who introduced himself as High Elder Valerius, studied Finn with a scrutiny that felt like a physical weight. He saw not a hero, but a liability. A human, a species known across the galaxy for its volatility and destructive potential. Valerius's judgment was swift and harsh. He declared that Finn's presence had contaminated the sanctuary's purity. The only way to cleanse it, he announced, was to erase Finn's memories of everything. The war, the Medica base, Lyrian, and the heart of Eler. He would be returned to his own time and place, his mind wiped clean, a ghost of his former self. Lyrian protested fiercely, her voice rising in a desperate plea, but her father was unmoved. He raised a hand, and a new kind of energy, cold and sharp, began to gather around Finn's head, threatening to scour his mind clean. Just as the first tendrils of the memory wipe touched his consciousness, Lyrian made her choice. She reached out and grasped Finn's hand, her grip iron strong. At the same instant, she turned her full power, the power of the heart, not on her father, but on the very fabric of the sanctuary itself. The beautiful city of crystal began to fracture. The towers cracked, the sky bled crimson, and the ground beneath their feet trembled violently. "If you take his memories, father, you take his soul," she cried out, her voice echoing with the power of a dying world. "And I will let this last memory of Eler crumble into nothingness before I allow that." It was a gambit of ultimate sacrifice. By destabilizing the sanctuary, she was threatening to destroy the last remnant of her entire civilization. Valerius's face, for the first time, showed true fear. He lowered his hand, the cold energy dissipating. The fracturing of the city slowed, but did not stop. The sanctuary was wounded, perhaps mortally. In that moment of chaos and heartbreak, Lyrian pulled Finn close. "There is one last place," she whispered urgently in his ear. "A place even my father does not know of. Hold on." Before Valerius could react, she channeled the last of her controlled power into a single, focused point. The world dissolved once more, but this time, the journey was rough, jarring, as if the very threads of reality were tearing. They materialized not in a place of beauty, but in a place of grim utility, the heart of a derelict Cthar warship, floating in the silent graveyard of a forgotten battlefield. The air was stale and metallic, the corridors dark and littered with the skeletal remains of the ship's former crew. This was her final secret, a stolen enemy vessel, hidden for just such an emergency. It was their only chance to escape the dying sanctuary and the reach of her father. But their respite was an illusion. As they moved through the darkened corridors, trying to find the bridge and reactivate the ship systems, alarms began to blare. Not the ship's old, broken alarms, but a new, active signal. A Cthar patrol had detected the energy surge from their arrival. They were trapped on a dead ship, with a fresh enemy closing in from outside and a vengeful father who could appear at any moment from the collapsing psychic realm. Their situation was more desperate than ever. Yet, as Finn looked at Lyrian, her face illuminated by the dim, flickering emergency lights, he saw not despair, but a fierce, unyielding determination. She had defied her own people, risked her world's last memory, and chosen him. In that shared look, amidst the wreckage of two civilizations, a new pact was forged, not of patient and medic, or human and alien, but of two souls bound together against an uncaring universe. Their fight for survival had just entered its most dangerous chapter, and the secret of the heart of Eler now rested not just with a princess, but with a simple human medic named Finn. The derelict Cthar warship groaned around them, a metal tomb adrift in a sea of cosmic debris. Finn's hands, usually so steady with a suture needle, now fumbled over the alien control panel on the bridge, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Lyrian stood beside him, her eyes closed in concentration, her fingers tracing glowing glyphs on a secondary console. She was trying to coax life back into the dead engines, to find a path through the labyrinth of the ship's corrupted navigation system. Outside the main viewport, the silent ballet of the battlefield graveyard was broken by the harsh, angular shapes of three Cthar patrol frigates closing in, their weapons ports glowing with malevolent energy. Their situation was a perfect storm of desperation. Behind them lay the collapsing sanctuary of Eler and the wrath of her father, High Elder Valerius. Before them was the relentless, brutal efficiency of the Cthar war machine. There was no escape, no clever trick left in Finn's medic's toolkit. He looked at Lyrian, her face a mask of intense focus, the blue light of her power flickering weakly around her like a dying star. He had brought her here, from a sterile medbay to this final hopeless stand. The weight of that responsibility settled on him, heavy and cold. Then, a new idea sparked, not from his training, but from the quiet, stubborn hope he'd seen in her eyes since the moment she'd whispered her secret. "The heart," he said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "You said it could heal or destroy. What if it doesn't have to be one or the other?" Lyrian's eyes snapped open, meeting his. He saw the understanding dawn in them, followed by a flash of fear, and then, finally, a fierce, brilliant resolve. She knew what he was asking. It was a gamble that could annihilate them both, but it was the only play left on the board as the lead Kthar frigate powered its main cannon, a beam of pure annihilation aimed at their crippled vessel. Lyrian placed her hands flat on the ship's central core interface. Finn stood behind her, his own hands resting gently on her shoulders, offering not his strength, but his unwavering belief in her. She didn't channel the heart's power as a weapon. Instead, she opened herself completely, becoming a conduit for its raw, creative energy. She didn't attack the Kthar ships, she reached out to the very space around them. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The vacuum of space before the Kthar fleet began to shimmer, not with heat, but with life. Tendrils of emerald energy, woven from stardust and memory, erupted from nothingness, forming a colossal living shield of crystalline flora, a phantom forest from her lost world of Eler. The Kthar's devastating energy beam struck the shield and didn't explode. It was absorbed, its destructive force converted into a cascade of harmless, sparkling light that rained down like gentle rain on the battlefield. The Kthar pilots, warriors bred for conquest and destruction, were stunned into inaction by this display of impossible peaceful power. Their sensors couldn't comprehend it. Their doctrine had no answer for creation used as a defense. In that moment of awestruck paralysis, Lyrian pushed the ship's newly awakened engines to their limit. The old Kthar vessel, now a vessel of hope, shot forward, weaving through the phantom forest and disappearing into the safety of a nearby asteroid field. They had escaped. But their victory came at a cost. The effort of such a grand act of creation had drained Lyrian completely. She slumped in Finn's arms, her skin losing its glow, her breathing shallow once more. Yet, she was smiling. Weeks later, on a small green world far from the front lines of any war, a new home was being built. It was a simple house, nestled in a valley between two gentle hills, its walls made of local stone and its roof thatched with golden grass. Finn O'Connell, no longer a corporal but a man who had seen the heart of a dying star and the soul of an alien princess, worked on the roof, hammering a nail with a quiet satisfaction. Below, in a sun-drenched garden, Lyrian knelt in the rich soil, her white hair tied back, her blue hands carefully tending to young saplings. These weren't just any plants. They were the first seeds of Eler, grown from the last spores she had carried within the heart. The heart of Eler was no longer a secret weapon or a burden of state. It was a promise. A promise of renewal, of a future built not on the ashes of war, but on the fertile ground of peace. News had come that the Kthar, shaken by their encounter with a power they could not destroy, had begun to question their endless campaigns of conquest. Even whispers had reached them of High Elder Valerius, who, from his crumbling sanctuary, had finally understood his daughter's choice. He had sent a single, silent blessing on the stellar winds. Finn climbed down from the roof and walked over to her. He didn't say anything, just offered her a hand to help her up. She took it, her storm-gray eyes meeting his, filled with a love that had been forged in the fires of a Medica Bay, tested in the void of space, and proven stronger than any galactic empire. Their story wasn't about a human and an alien anymore. It was about Finn and Lyrian, two souls who had changed each other's destinies and in doing so, had offered a fragile, beautiful hope to a galaxy that had forgotten how to dream. And as they stood together, watching the twin suns of their new world dip below the horizon, they knew their greatest adventure, the quiet, daily work of building a life, a family, and a future, was just beginning. The simple house in the valley became a home, its walls echoing not with the alarms of war but with laughter and the soft murmur of shared conversations. Finn traded his medic's kit for a farmer's tools, his hands now coaxing life from the soil instead of stitching it back into broken bodies. Lyrian, her strength fully returned, used the gentle power of the heart not for grand cosmic displays, but for nurturing. The garden around their home flourished in impossible ways, flowers that bloomed in a spectrum of colors unseen on any human world, fruit trees whose branches grew heavy with sweet, nourishing bounty year-round, and a small grove of crystalline saplings that chimed softly in the breeze, a living memory of Eler. Their wedding was a quiet affair, held beneath the boughs of their own orchard. There were no galactic dignitaries or royal processions, just a few trusted friends from the old Medica base who had managed to find their way to this peaceful corner of the galaxy. Dr. Eris, his perpetually flustered demeanor softened by time and peace, gave Lyrian away, his eyes misty with emotion. They exchanged vows written in both their languages, promises of partnership, protection, and unwavering love, spoken under a sky painted with the soft light of their world's 2 moons. Years flowed by like a gentle river. Their family grew, a perfect blend of their 2 worlds. Their children inherited their mother's blue-tinged skin and their father's warm, brown eyes, their white hair catching the sunlight like spun silver. They ran through the fields, played among the singing trees, and learned stories of both a brave human medic and a lost alien princess who had defied an uncaring universe to be together. Finn taught them how to mend a broken fence and the names of Earth's constellations. Lyrian taught them the old songs of Eler and how to listen to the quiet hum of the planet's life force. The galaxy, for its part, slowly began to heal. The Cthar War, starved of its primary aggressor's will, sputtered to a halt. The legend of the blue-skinned woman and her human consort, who had wielded creation as a shield, became a parable of hope across 1,000 worlds. High Elder Valerius, his heart finally unburdened of its ancient grief, sent a final gift. A single perfect seed from the original heart of Eler, which they planted at the center of their garden. It grew into a magnificent tree, its branches wide and strong, its leaves shimmering with a soft internal light, a beacon of peace visible from orbit. On their golden anniversary, Finn and Lyrian sat on their porch, their hands intertwined, watching their grandchildren chase fireflies that glowed with the same soft blue light as their grandmother's eyes. The lines on their faces were maps of a life well lived, etched with joy, sorrow, hard work, and profound love. They had faced the end of a world and the wrath of empires, but they had built something far more enduring. A simple, happy life filled with family, purpose, and a love that had truly changed the stars. And as the twin suns set, casting a warm golden glow over their valley, they knew, with a quiet certainty that needed no words, that they had found their forever.